For 90% of human history, we did not farm. We wandered. We followed the herds. We followed the ripening fruit. We followed the rain. We were hunters and gatherers, and our world was enormous. A single tribe might roam a territory the size of a small country, moving with the seasons, taking only what nature provided, and moving on before the land could grow tired of them. Then something happened, something that changed everything. Somewhere around 12,000 years ago, in the fertile river valleys of the Middle East, humans made a radical choice. Instead of moving to where the food was, we decided to make the food come to us. This was the agricultural revolution, and it was the first economic boom in human history. At first, it seemed like a wonderful idea. Why spend all day walking when you could stay in one place? Why trust that wild wheat would grow where you happened to be when you could plant it right outside your door? Why risk hunting dangerous wild animals when you could keep docile goats and sheep in a pen and eat them whenever you wanted? It was security. It was control. It was the human mind bending nature to its will. The earliest farmers planted seeds in the mud and watched them grow. They learned to dig irrigation ditches, bringing water from the rivers to fields that would otherwise be too dry. They learned to build fences and pens, keeping their animals close and safe. For the first time, humans could predict where their next meal was coming from. They could plan for next month and next year. They could store surplus grain against the possibility of a bad season. This surplus changed everything. For the first time, a family could produce more food than they needed to eat. For the first time, not everyone had to spend every waking moment searching for food. Some people could do other things. Some people became potters, making containers to store all that extra grain. Some people became builders, constructing permanent homes and granaries and walls. Some people became priests, talking to the gods who made the sun shine and the rain fall. Some people became soldiers, protecting the village from jealous neighbors who wanted to take that precious grain. This was the birth of the economy as we understand it. Not just survival, not just sharing within the tribe, but production, surplus, trade, specialization. A potter in one village makes pots. A farmer in another village grows grain. They meet and exchange, grain for pots, pots for tools, tools for cloth. Value is created. Value is transferred. Value is stored. The economy begins to breathe. Villages grew into towns. Towns grew into cities. Cities grew into civilizations. Population exploded. Before farming, the entire human population of the earth was probably less than 5 million people. After farming, within just a few thousand years, there were hundreds of millions. Farming could support 50 times more people on the same amount of land than hunting and gathering ever could. It was an economic miracle. It was progress. But progress always comes with a price. The agricultural revolution was not just a boom. It was also a trap. Consider the life of a hunter-gatherer. They worked fewer hours. They ate a wider variety of foods. They were taller and healthier than the first farmer. Their average workday was perhaps 4 or 5 hours. Now consider the life of a farmer. They woke at dawn and worked until dusk. They ate the same few things every day. When the harvest was bad, they starved. When the harvest was good, they worked even harder to store it all. Disease spread easily in crowded villages. The average workday was sunrise to sunset, 7 days a week, and there was no going back. Once you have a village of 500 people, depending on stored grain, you cannot simply decide to go back to wandering the forest. You are tied to the land. You are tied to the calendar. You are tied to the weather. Freedom had been traded for security. Then there was the question of ownership. Hunter-gatherers owned almost nothing. The land belonged to everyone and no one. But farmers needed to own things. They needed to own the field they had cleared. They needed to own the grain they had stored. Ownership required boundaries. Boundaries required fences. Fences required enforcement. Enforcement required laws. Laws required rulers. For the first time, humans invented hierarchy. Someone had to decide who got which field. Someone had to decide how much grain went to the priests and how much went to the soldiers. Leaders emerged. Kings appeared. Taxes were invented. Armies were formed. The first governments were born. And they were born because of agriculture. And with government came inequality. In hunter-gatherer bands, everyone was roughly equal. Everyone had the same access to food. But in agricultural societies, inequality became baked into the system. The king had more than the priest. The priest had more than the soldier. The soldier had more than the farmer. The farmer had more than the slave. For the first time, vast differences in wealth and power became normal. Yet the boom continued. With surplus food and specialized labor, humans began to create things that had never existed before. They created writing to keep track of grain stored in warehouses. They created mathematics to measure fields and calculate taxes. They created astronomy to predict the seasons and know when to plant. They created monumental architecture, temples and pyramids built not because anyone needed them, but because the economy now produced enough excess that society could afford to pour years of labor into something beautiful and eternal. They created cities, dense concentrations of humans living on top of each other, trading, arguing, inventing, dreaming. They created markets where goods from hundreds of miles away could be bought and sold. They created money, a universal language of value that everyone could understand. The agricultural revolution did not just change what we ate, it changed who we were. It changed how we thought about time. Hunter-gatherers lived in an eternal present. But farmers lived in cycles. They planted in hope. They waited in anxiety. They harvested in celebration. They stored in fear of the winter. They planned for next year. They worried about things that had not happened yet. It changed how we thought about each other. In a village of strangers, you could not rely on kinship alone. You needed rules. You needed contracts. You needed laws that applied to everyone. You needed civilization. It changed how we thought about the earth. For hunter-gatherers, the earth was a mother, a sacred presence. For farmers, the earth was a resource to be exploited, a field to be cleared, a forest to be burned, a river to be diverted. The earth was no longer something you belonged to. It was something that belonged to you. Today, we are still living in the shadow of the agricultural revolution. Every time you go to a supermarket, you are benefiting from the surplus it created. Every time you check your bank balance, you are using a concept it invented. Every time you pay taxes, you are participating in a system it made necessary. Every time you worry about your job or your retirement, you are feeling the anxiety it introduced into human life. We are still farmers. We are still tied to cycles of planting and harvesting, even if our planting is a college degree and our harvesting is a pension. We are still anxious about the winter, even if our winter is old age, and our stored grain is a savings account. We are still building cities and paying taxes and arguing about property lines. The agricultural revolution was the first economic boom. It gave us civilization. It gave us art and writing and mathematics and cities. It gave us everything we think of when we think of human achievement. But it also gave us inequality and anxiety and hard labor and war. It gave us the world we live in, for better and for worse. And it all started with a seed, a single seed, planted in the mud by someone who was just hungry, just tired of walking, just looking for a way to make tomorrow a little bit easier. Someone exactly like us. What will we plant next?